This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Okay, so your learning objectives for this lecture are to be able to identify the major classes of medically relevant natural products that are derived from plants. So again, we're not going to be focusing on other types of natural products, for example, those that are commonly found in marine organisms or in fungi, macrofungi, microfungi. We're going to focus primarily on plants. And we're going to go over what are plant secondary metabolites and why on earth do plants make them? Why are they making these compounds? And you'll note in the name they're called secondary metabolites for a reason. And lastly is how do indigenous people use sensory cues from plants to understand a plant's chemistry and its potential for medicinal value? How many of you have ever been on a walk with a botanist? Okay, so when you're walking with a botanist, what is one thing that they use a lot besides their eyes to identify a plant? What's the first thing they do?
Touch or scent.
They touch and sense. So you'll often see botanists when they're going on a walk and looking to try and see, oh, what plant is that? One of the first things you'll see us do is snip off a piece of leaf, rub it in our fingers, and smell it. My husband's always getting on to me because I do that at the botanical gardens. He's like, you can't do that. You can't be breaking all the leaves. But yes, so sensory cues, and that's what indigenous people use as well. The way that plants smell, the way that they look, the way that they taste is indicative in many cases to their underlying chemistry. And the reason that we use those cues again is because the chemistry is often shared along taxonomic lineages. So you have certain types of compounds often produced by related species. So let's go over what are secondary metabolites. Well, these are organic compounds that are not directly involved in basic survival of the organism. That refers to primary metabolites. So primary metabolites are responsible for the growth of the plant, its development and reproduction. Okay, the very core basic principles that help plants to live. Secondary metabolites, on the other hand, are responsible for all the extra things. So these are used by plants to defend against predation and herbivory. They're used in what we call competitive warfare with other organisms living within their ecological niche. They are also used as attractants for pollinators. So one of the questions I like to always pose to the class is, not really a question, but more of a reflection. Who here has seen Lord of the Rings? Okay, so you know the tree creature, I forget its name, it has a name in the book and in the story. You know? The Ents. So what do they do when they are in trouble? What do they do?
I know they stomp around.
They stomp around. The big thing is they move. They're able to move. They're able to get up and walk across the forest. Now, we know in plants in the real world can't do that. Plants are sessile, right? So in order for them to really be able to defend themselves against threats in their environment or to bring things close to them, they're really reliant on chemical crosstalk. And that's where we sometimes also get lucky and find medicinal compounds that are shared within this group of communication compounds. So in addition to attracting pollinators and defense, these compounds are made to support dispersal by making, for example, fruits taste sweet. What's the advantage in having sweet-tasting fruits for a plant? Why put all that sugar into the fruit?
To spread the seeds.
To spread the seeds, it makes it taste nice, right? It's the same reason why not all fruits taste the same, right? The taste that they have comes down to the chemistry of the plant. So it's an advantage that they're trying to gain in dispersal. Also, these compounds are responsible for the coloration of different plants, the flavors, the odors, all of these aromatic and volatile qualities, these sensory qualities of plants are due to the secondary metabolites. Why is coloration important? Why is the color of a plant important?
It could produce cellular what stage?
kind of thing?
We use it as an interpretation of what stage of the life cycle is the plant is the fruit mature and mature. Yeah.
It's like a signaling mechanism?
The signaling mechanism, again, to help recruit pollinators, to help recruit other animals that might eat, again, the fruits and disperse the seeds. And here's that main point again. Because plants are sessile, these compounds are really critical in either attracting or deterring other organisms as needed. And the underlying principle here is that secondary metabolites can enhance or increase survival of a plant, okay? Whereas primary metabolites are absolutely necessary for life. Here's my little cartoon drawing I like to use to explain this concept. So here we have a lovely tree, and I don't have a pointer. Maybe I can use this here. So, well, maybe not. So we have a tree. First thing I want you to think about is within the environment of this tree, what do we have? We have two different ecosystems. You have below the soil or below the ground line and above, okay, and everything that happens within this territory. So again, remember the ecosystem is not just what we see above ground, but it's also below ground. So first question, is soil sterile? No, it's not sterile. If you ever look at a soil sample under the microscope, you'll see a lot of microbial life. Sometimes that microbial life can be a threat to plants. Sometimes you can have plant pathogens in the soil. And so plants will sometimes produce chemicals into different tissues, in this case, into root tissues, to fight off invasion by fungal pathogens or bacterial pathogens that might be present in the soil. That's one example. Now, let's think about the next question is, do plants live kind of in an environment with no other botanical species nearby? No, oftentimes you have other plants. So here we have our little herbaceous, pretty purple flower. Well, sometimes it's not to the advantage of species to have other species encroaching on their environment. So sometimes they can also release compounds into the soil that prevent germination of other seeds. So it's selectively stopping or blocking the growth of other plants within its territory. It's like it's saying, this is my zone. You can't grow here, okay? Because it's about resource competition. Those compounds might also be of interest for medicine. Then we have other compounds that are produced, again, to attract pollinators. There are some that are produced to defend against herbivory. There have been some studies, for example, of acacia trees that can actually ramp up production of compounds like tannins. We'll learn about tannins today, what that can do to the gut of an animal. But in this case, they were also able to increase the production of HCN, that means hydrogen cyanide. So essentially, plants can regulate how much of a toxic compound they need to create to boost their survival based on what threats they're being presented with. This is why when we spoke about in the last class, it's important to take good documentation of where you're collecting your specimens for biological analysis. So when we're taking that ethnobotanical approach to drug discovery, collecting bulk specimens, this is why the chemistry of one cluster of plants could be different from another cluster. Again, because you might have a different sort of niche in which that other plant is growing in, even though they might be the same species. Any questions on that before we move forward? Pretty simple kind of concept, though, when you think about it. Okay, so these are the major groups of natural products from plants. There are phenolics and polyphenols, quinones, flavones, flavonoids, and flavonols, tannins, coumarins, terpenoids, and essential oils. These tend to be the compounds that are highly volatile and very aromatic. Alkaloids, those tend to be your psychoactives, as far as pharmacologically speaking. Lectins and polypeptides, phenylproteins, lignans, and glycosides. So we're going to go through each of these. Now, for those of you that have had organic chemistry, this is not at all scary. But for those of you who have not, don't worry. We'll go through this slowly. The basic things that you need to know are looking at the basic structures. So in phenolics, you can have, this is a phenolic ring, okay? You can have single substitutions or many substitutions. What's interesting about phenolics is that they often have very high antioxidant activity. And this is also linked to the number of hydroxyl groups, or those OH groups shown here. Does anyone know why? We'll get to that in a minute. I'm actually going to wait, I think, to go over why the hydroxyls are important as I explain what an antioxidant is. Everyone's heard of an antioxidant, I'm sure, but you probably have no idea what it actually means. We hear about antioxidants in our marketing, of superfoods and super beverages, and this fruit from the Amazon is going to be in your smoothie, and it's going to be a super antioxidant boost. Really? What does that even mean? So we'll go over that. A lot of it has to do with the levels of polyphenolics in those plants. Okay, moving on to another class, we have the quinones. Has anyone ever had a henna tattoo before? Okay, so henna. Henna comes from, the plant is Lawsonia inermis. It's actually in the Fabaceae family, or the bean family, and it's rich in quinones. Now, why do quinones give this kind of dyeing property like we see in henna? Well, these are also responsible for the browning activity you see when you cut vegetables. When you cut an apple, how it turns brown after it's being exposed for a bit to the air, that's because of the levels of quinones in the plant. Quinones can also be useful by inactivating proteins, and that makes them interesting for potential applications as antibacterials because they can bind with surface-exposed adhesins. What does that mean, you're probably thinking? Let me show you. So if you have the surface of a bacteria, it has little sticky proteins around it. These sticky proteins are important for bacteria to be able to attach to the organism or attach to a device. So sometimes quinones can actually bind with those and inactivate them to make the bacteria less sticky. And also they can interact with membrane-bound enzymes, so different types of proteins in the membrane. And here's an example of an anthocyanin in the center. And again, you're not going to be tested on these, the different types of structures, but just knowing generally what these different classes do. Some other quinones that are probably you've heard of, but didn't really link with the fact that they are quinones, are popular in dietary supplements. So Hypericin is an anthocyanin. This is the structure. And this is St. John's wort. So in the last class, we brought out a bottle of the oil of St. John's wort. And remember, Hypericin is the compound that causes photoreactivity in people that take it. So that means if you're taking a lot of Hypericin in a supplement form through St. John's wort's tablets, it can actually make you more photosensitive, or you can basically get very bad sunburns when exposed to light. But this is one of the active compounds that demonstrates anti-staphylococcal activity, so it is antibacterial as well. And this example, this gentleman is someone I was interviewing in Italy. He was working with a group of villagers. This is not, because I had one student ask me if he was like a prisoner. No, they're just wearing these orange kind of things so they don't get run over while they're crossing the road. These are local villagers, and they're cleaning up some of the forest paths, basically. It's kind of like a temporary forester job. And he's holding in his hand some St. John's wort there that they also use in Italy, again, in these oil preparations. And in this case, he cited the use in treating saddle sores and things in his animals, so as a kind of liniment to treat infected saddle sores. Now, other anthocyanins, other examples come from plants like Cassia italica. If you recall, Cassia was a plant also used, or genus also used in Egyptian medicine from our spice lecture. But these tend to be very good as antibacterial agents across a number of different pathogens. Now, moving on to flavones, flavonoids, and flavonols, this is just a slide showing the difference in structure between these three classes. So your flavones have one carbonyl group. That's the double bonded with the oxygen. And flavonols, basically you add on a hydroxyl group, and flavonoids are also hydroxylated but in a different pattern. Now what's interesting about these compounds is why they're made by plants. So for example, flavonoids, here's a good example of one that we'll come across in our later lectures, quercetin. Anyone want to guess which genus we find quercetin in?
Quercus?
Quercus, very good. Can you tell everybody what that is? Oak. So in oak trees, different types of oaks. Quercus, quercetin, it's ubiquitous in many quercus species. So these are plant compounds that are synthesized in response to infection. So again, this is something that's ramped up, right, as a response to pathogens. In this case, it can be active also against human pathogens, including HIV and RSV and some bacteria as well. Now, catechins have also shown some antibacterial activity against a few different bugs, including Streptococcus mutans and Shigella and Vibrio, and have also been linked to inactivation of the cholera toxin. Isoflavones, on the other hand, are active against a variety of microbes and have been used to treat schistosomiasis. So again, this lecture has more of an anti-infective twist to it, but there are other activities as well. Now, what's interesting about the character of flavonoids is that these are the compounds that are responsible for the yellow and orange pigmentation of flowers. And it comes from the root word flavus, meaning yellow. So these are often ubiquitous or found or universal throughout the plant kingdom. And again, one of the likely major roles of these compounds is to attract pollinators. So it's attracting insects or birds, or also could be used to make the fruits taste either intensely bitter or intensely sweet. It's really interesting. There's a whole broad spectrum, but some of the kind of artificial, or not artificial, but natural sweeteners can come from flavonoids and have this intense sweet taste to them. Another important key factor here is, again, that because they're phenolic compounds, and what do I mean by phenolic? These are compounds that have lots of those hydroxyl, those OH groups hanging off of them. This makes them strongly antioxidant. Okay. So what's nice about flavonoids, if you take the health course, Many Diseases, Few Causes, you're going to learn a lot about oxidative stress and its role in chronic disease and many different disease states. It's kind of outside the scope of this lecture. But know that many disease states are induced by a kind of oxidative imbalance where you have a lot of free radicals circulating in the body, which can lead to a chronic state of inflammation.
Can you explain what free radicals are?
Mm-hmm. Actually, we'll get to that in the next slide. Yes, I will, though. If you still have questions, ask me again. Good. So free radicals can cause a lot of damage to your cell membranes throughout the body. Now, foods, and specifically foods rich in flavonoids, have been proposed as a way of boosting your levels of antioxidants in the body through exogenous antioxidant intake. So what do I mean by exogenous versus endogenous? Anybody know what endogenous means, Micah?
Inside the person?
Inside the person. So we actually, our bodies actually make our own set of numerous endogenous antioxidants. So we are our own antioxidant factory, okay? Exogenous antioxidants, on the other hand, are antioxidants taken in from outside. So that would be consumption of foods rich in antioxidants, or consumption of a medicine rich in these. I should say heart, not hearth disease. Sorry. So foods rich in flavonoids have been proposed as a way to help deal with cancer and heart disease and other kind of chronic diseases that are strongly correlated with this state of chronic oxidative stress. Now, flavonoids can occur both as free structures or aglycone structures and also glycosides. And we'll get to glycosides in a bit, but basically what that means is you have a compound joined with a sugar. So you can have a flavonoid on its own, or you can have a version of a flavonoid that's linked to a sugar. And oftentimes, once it gets into the gut, that sugar is cleaved off by enzymes in your gut, sometimes produced by microbes in the gut, allowing for the activity of the antioxidant compound to move forward. Now, what is an antioxidant? So this is a molecule that can inhibit the oxidation of other molecules. And remember that oxidation is, again, this chemical reaction of electron transfer. Oxidation can produce free radicals, which again can lead to oxidative stress if they're not neutralized. So some of the sources of reactive oxygen species, or ROSs, are, again, within our own bodies. So not only do we produce our own antioxidants, but we also make our own free radicals and kind of waste products. So there is leakage, for example, from the mitochondria. Your mitochondria are your cellular powerhouses, and in that process of making power or making ATP, you can have release of things like H2O2. Anyone know what that is? Hydrogen peroxide, right? So when you're thinking of a chronic, really serious oxidative stress state, I want you to think about that bottle of hydrogen peroxide. What happens when you pour hydrogen peroxide on your body? Do you have a cut? Bubbles and fizzes. Actually, it's not good for you to expose yourself to too much hydrogen peroxide. It can damage and kill your host cells as well. So think about it this way. You've got little bursts of that fizzy stuff being made in your body all the time. So that can cause damage if the levels get too high. Now, in a normal person, though, without any kind of other genetic defects that would lead to an imbalance in oxidative stress, if you're on a healthy diet, normal, healthy, active person, your oxidative stress load should not be in the red. It should be pretty balanced out, right? But there are other external environmental factors that can increase your level of reactive oxygen species in the body. So again, we already spoke about this kind of leak of radicals from the mitochondria just by making energy. But there are also, these can also be important though in some cases. So what about acute inflammation? What's an example of a situation where you might have an acute period of inflammation? Let's go back to that finger cut. What happens when you cut your finger? What does your finger look like besides the blood? It turns red. That's a step in inflammation. You have, what are the different steps? It's rubor, dolor. It's like 5 steps. Do you guys know these? It's basically you turn red because of color. The red color comes from increased circulation. Dolor means pain. You have a pain response, so you don't keep cutting off your finger, right? You stop. You have movement of or capillary dilation at the site, which leads to the color. And then there's also an immune response that happens, again, with moving that blood into the region. So in this case, you have selective release of your own kind of powerhouse, your own hydrogen peroxide, basically, that you're sending to the site. So in that case, your body is helping to fight off the infection. So free radicals can be useful in specific cases. Where they become dangerous is when you have chronic, all the time, this stuff just circulating in your body at high levels. Okay. Other ways to increase free radicals is UV light. Have you ever seen someone that just loves tanning beds, maybe in their teens, and then they get to their 50s? What do they look like?
Leather.
They look like leather. The reason they look like leather, I grew up in Florida. A lot of people like their sun, right? They look like leather, and there's also higher risks of skin cancer. All that, again, is linked to free radical production and damage of the cells. Exposure to radiation also increases huge amounts of oxidative stress. Smoking increases it. Air pollution increases it. So it's when you get that, in addition to just your body's normal response, when all these extra factors come into play, that you can get to oxidative stress. Now, what is the nature of the damage that these reactive oxygen species do? Is they can damage the DNA itself, which again can lead to what?
Cancer.
Cancer. You can basically lead to dysfunction in your cells, right? And that's one of the reasons that people can get skin cancer is with overexposure in certain skin types. You have a lot of DNA damage at the site. You also get oxidation of your polyunsaturated fatty acids in lipid peroxidation. So this can actually cause damage to your cellular membranes. You can also damage your proteins and inactivate specific enzymes as well. So it can cause damage to many different basic processes in the body. Now, how does an antioxidant work? So with a normal oxygen atom, what happens is when it's exposed to, or when some kind of force, let's say that you have radiation coming in, it can pop one of these guys loose. And that makes it unstable, right? So this guy's gone. It makes it unstable. This is what a free radical is. It's an unstable piece. So what happens is free radicals, where they like to go, is to your cell membrane. And they'll steal a piece from your cell membrane, and then that part of the cell membrane becomes unstable. So they steal from their neighbor. That becomes unstable. They steal from their neighbor. And so in the end, you can actually degrade a big chunk of the cell membrane. What happens when you degrade the cell membrane? It goes poof or plop. All the junk falls out of it. Then you get inflammation as your body responds to all the waste products. And here you have, again, erosion of the cell membrane. Now, what an antioxidant does that's unique is that it can donate, for example, donate a proton and neutralize that free radical without becoming a free radical itself. That's the key. Right? So it can donate without becoming a free radical, and the chain reaction can stop there. Now, some examples of dietary antioxidants or plants that are rich in dietary antioxidants include your dark berries. This is why everyone says it's good for you to eat your dark berries, like your blueberries. Yeah?
I just have a question. So you said for radicals that an electron leaves the... Then, if it donates a proton...
Sorry, an electron.
Oh, just...
Sorry. Yes. So you're restabilizing the unit, the oxygen atom. So plants that are rich in antioxidants, again, include your dark berries. Your blackberries are very rich in anthocyanins. Things like grapes, blueberries, strawberries. Other sources of rich dietary antioxidants include your tomatoes, again, lycopene. But remember, your levels of lycopene found in immature fruits might be very different from those in mature fruits. So it's really understanding what's a mature fruit. And chocolate. Anyone recognize this? This is a chocolate pod that's been popped open. This is what chocolate looks like. It's cacao, Theobroma cacao. Anyone know where the chocolate comes from out of that? You can eat the white flesh. It's kind of a light, mildly sweet, not very sweet. But you actually ferment the inside. So the way that it used to be made is they would just open it up, let it ferment in the sun. Fermentation does what? It can change the chemistry, so it actually helps to remove some of the bitter constituents. The seeds are then dried, and then they're opened up in the nibs, and you have the cocoa butter is extracted after that. And turmeric is also an important antioxidant. So you don't need to get super exotic miracle fruits from the Amazon to have access to foods rich in polyphenolics. So here we have examples of anthocyanins. You have on the top a cyanidin, and the bottom a proanthocyanin, and these are basically dimers or two cyanidins joined together. You can see the structure there. And bilberries, relatives of blueberries, are also good sources of these types of compounds. What's interesting is that these anthocyanins have what we call superoxide radical scavenging effects. They have a lot of these hydroxyl groups that they're able to basically, again, remain stable while donating to the free radical. Resveratrol is also a naturally occurring food that is flavonoid that also has high antioxidant activity. You've all heard of resveratrol and red wine and the justification, I'll drink my red wine so I can get my resveratrol, right? What other plant can you get resveratrol from, though, without being alcoholic?
Japanese knotweed?
No. You cannot get high enough levels out of just the unfermented grape. Resveratrol is augmented through the fermentation pattern. So if you drink a gallon of grape juice, you're going to get a little bit of resveratrol, but not much. What was it you said, Dr. Foss?
Japanese knotweed?
Japanese knotweed. I have no idea what that is.
Highly invasive.
Highly invasive.
Riverbacks.
Okay. Here's an easy kind of Jimmy Carter crop that has a lot of resveratrol. Anybody know what it is? Peanuts. Peanuts actually have a lot of resveratrol, so that P&J sandwich you might have for lunch or breakfast can be helpful in boosting that. Again, going back to the production and the role of fermentation, it's really the grape skin where the resveratrol is located. So if you have white wine, which is fermented without the skin, you're not going to get the same levels of resveratrol. So it really needs to be the red wine fermented with the skin. This is also related to the length of time that the grape skins are kept in the fermentation state. So the longer they ferment, the more resveratrol is going to come out of the process. And again here, grape juice, this has some comparison. A fluid ounce of red wine averages 160 micrograms of resveratrol compared to peanuts, which average 73 micrograms. So you're not going to get quite the same amount in your peanuts, but it's not bad. And then the grape juice is just not a very significant source because you don't have that fermentation step and the presence with the grape skins. Who's heard of acai berry? What kind of plant does acai come from? I have the scientific name, but you probably won't know what it is. You don't even have to give me the scientific family, just the general description. What kind of plant is it? Is it a herb? Is it a bush?
It's a tree.
It's a tree. Good. What kind of tree? I'll give you another clue. It's found in South America and the Amazon. It's a staple food for local people. Staple food, not a fad product. It's a staple food, staple part of their diet. It's a palm tree. It's a kind of palm tree. So these are palm fruits. And I've got some pictures here at the top and the bottom. So you have the purple varieties. You have different cultivars, different varieties that are being cultivated in the Amazon basin. These ones with the purple fruits are actually not very highly valued by local people, those are the ones that they sell. So they sell us the stuff they don't really want or value. And what they do value are these green fruits. So this is not mature versus immature. This is how the actual ripe mature fruits look. And this goes into a kind of, again, a staple food. It's made into a type of porridge and other kind of soups and things that's eaten on a regular basis. Now, everyone learned about acai berry from none other than Dr. Oz, okay, and Oprah. Everyone saw that Dr. Oz has basically been debunked, right? Please tell me yes. Okay, yes. His claims many times on his shows are not accurate in any way. If you've ever read, follow up on his work, he's actually been brought before Congress because of some of his outrageous claims. He does damage, I think, to herbal and medicinal plant research because he makes these outrageous claims of activities of plants as weight loss agents, and he's doing this because he's getting paid a lot of money by these companies, and it's not based on any scientific evidence. So unfortunately, that misleads the public and then leads to a general distrust of medicinal plant activities when you have a spokesman like that. So I do have a bone to pick with Dr. Oz, I guess. But this again has the purple fruits are rich in polyphenols, these anthocyanins. In particular, you have cyanidin 3-O-glucoside and then cyanidin 3-O-rutinoside that was being sold in these wine bottle-like packaging known as Mona V, and there are a couple other different lines where it was being sold for very expensive bottles, by the way. I think, again, this is a case where you could get just as much or better benefit from having a bowl of blueberries or blueberries on, with your cereal or yogurt in the morning. Okay, moving on, we're going to talk about tannins now. Everyone's heard of tanning leather before. Like, this is a practice we no longer really have the skills to do in the general public anymore, but in the past and in different parts of the world, they still do tan leather using plant parts. So the tannins are these compounds that have highly astringent properties. They can, if you have something that's rich in tannins in your food, it can often resemble almost like a sour, kind of puckering sensation, not quite bitter, but more of a sour, and that's just because of the astringent nature of these compounds. They're found in many plant parts, and they act by complexing with proteins. So because of their level of interaction with proteins, tannins can often be very good antibacterial agents and also inactivate certain enzymes or cell envelope transport proteins. And you can see their structures quite, tend to be quite large with many different groups kind of hanging off of them. And in the top figure, you can see someone that's tanning leather. Now, these represent a very large group under the group of polyphenols. They're most widely found in parts of the plant like the bark, the insect galls, leaves, stems, and fruits. What is an insect gall? This is something that I think a lot of students maybe don't know. An insect gall. Yes?
It's like a sort of inflammatory response to an insect on the tree.
That's right. So this is when you can see examples here. Basically, if an insect is perhaps laying its eggs or trying to embed its eggs into part of the plant tissue, this is almost like what we would equate with in a human is like a tumor response, where it's basically building a protective wall around the invader. Okay, so you have this gall that's formed. So galls are really interesting to me because they not only are this kind of almost like an immune response, protective response of the plant against invaders, but they also often represent a potent chemical response. Now, here's an example one of my students is working on. She's going to speak about at lab meeting today. This is Rosa Canina. This is the dog rose. And what's interesting about Rosa Canina is that it's used in countries like Turkey to treat diarrheal illnesses in children. So they don't take the fruits of Rosa Canina. You have these beautiful fruits that they make. Instead, they take these galls, and here you can see what it looks like along the stem. And we're working on trying to figure out the chemistry and the bioactivity of these galls and comparing it to the chemistry and bioactivity of the other plant parts. So our hypothesis is that these galls, as a response to invasion by the plant, are going to have a different plant chemistry and a different plant bioactivity than we're going to see in the other normal tissues. And indeed, tannins can be useful as antidiarrheal agents, not just because of potential antibacterial activity, but also because of their astringent properties. What did you do, or what did your mother have you drink when you were younger and you had diarrhea? We're going to talk about diarrhea in this class, so sorry. So what do you do when you have diarrhea? What would she give you? No, not. Something from her kitchen. What would she give you? Chicken noodle soup, okay, maybe.
Didn't we say mint tea at some point, or was that something else?
That's for kind of gastric upset.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Did you ever have
Black tea?
black tea? Kind of a weak black tea. This is still a widely used remedy. Like just, you get your tea bag of Lipton's, okay? And you use that weak. You might water it down a little bit. You might also add some lemon juice, also an astringent, with the goal being to stop the diarrhea. So there are some low levels of tannins in that tea. Gives it kind of its bitter taste as well, and that can help to, yeah?
I was just going to ask if you could explain why it reduces the absorption of proteins and nutrients.
Yes, I will know that. So because of its astringent qualities, think about when you're tanning leather, or better yet, for the girls in the class, does anyone use a toner on your face? Like it's an astringent toner. It tightens your pores, right? A good example of products used for that are also from witch hazel. Toner, it tightens up the pores. That's what tannins do, is they tighten up those membranes, and that can help to reduce the amount of diarrhea. How does diarrhea work? You've got too much water coming across the gut, right? That's going the opposite direction. It should be going out of the gut into the bloodstream, instead it's going the reverse way. So you can help to tighten up those membranes and reduce the amount of water flowing out. So your question about reducing absorption with tannins is that because tannins bind so well with proteins, if you have a tannin-rich diet, and I'm talking a lot of tannins, I'm talking about eating acorn bread like every day, and you can reduce the level of tannins in acorn bread. Everyone knows you can eat acorns if you process them correctly by oftentimes burying them in certain types of clay. You can bind up some of the tannins to the clay. There's even something called black bread that they use in Native American cultures, especially along California, where they can bind up some of these tannins and make this kind of clay and acorn flour bread. Okay, but in any case, when you have high levels of tannin consumption, those tannins in your gut can bind up to the proteins, meaning the food. So if you have other semi-digested protein materials in your gut, they can bind that up and reduce delivery to your body from the gut. So it can actually lead to protein deficiencies in which nutrients are being absorbed. And you had a question. Did that answer it?
Oh, no. Isn't tannin also found in the black waters of the Amazon? Like that?
Very good. Why is tannin found in the waters of the Amazon? The black waters of the Amazon. With the piranhas. I've been swimming in the black waters of the Amazon with the piranhas, fearless. It's because of the high levels of tannins in the leaves of the trees that are hanging over the waters, right? If you go to Florida, there are also rivers that are blackwater rivers. It's because of trees and other foliage that has very rich levels of tannins that can fall into the waters, and it discolors the water. Okay, Let's move on to coumarins. I want to make sure we have enough time to go through all the different classes. So has anyone heard of warfarin? Yeah, and Coumadin, right? When does a patient in the ER need to be given a coumarin or a Coumadin derivative?
Well, whenever they've had like a heart attack or stroke, because it thins the blood.
Yeah, it's a blood thinner. So when you have some sort of clotting in the body of your bloodstream, this can help to reduce the clotting. But guess what else coumarins are used in warfarin in particular? Rat poison. Have you ever had rat problems? I unfortunately had a rat problem under our house. So we put some poison out. It basically makes them bleed out because you give them a lot of these coumarins. It thins their blood so much they just bleed out. These are best known for, their antithrombotic or clot-reducing properties. They also tend to be anti-inflammatory and vasodilatory, meaning that they can increase the dilation of the vascular system. What else is interesting is that coumarins can also stimulate the immune system through stimulation of macrophages. What does a macrophage do? I like to think of them as Pac-Man. They're going around the body, gobbling up, kind of invading pathogens or other things that shouldn't be in the body. Coumarin has also been used to treat certain types of viral infections. One of the, I think, most interesting type of coumarin or class of coumarins would be the psoralens. So if you recall on maybe our first lecture, I talked about this ancient Egyptian medicine and the ability that was rich in psoralens, and you basically had change in coloration of the skin through puva, for puva therapy is what we call it today. But these are often found in the Rutaceae family, that's the citrus family, and the carrot family. What's unique about these compounds is that they readily absorb light, and so in dermatology, we still use these compounds to treat patients that have vitiligo. So vitiligo is a disease where you lose pigmentation in your skin, which can be, psychologically traumatic, I think, when you have your skin patches kind of showing up in different colorations. And so you can actually give patients these psoralen, different types of psoralens, and then expose them to UVA light, and that's called PUVA therapy, psoralen ultraviolet light therapy, and that can help in treating that discoloration because of the absorption. It cross-links DNA at the skin. It's also been used in treatments of eczema and psoriasis, although we still don't have a very effective therapy for eczema and psoriasis. Here again is that example of Coumarins. So Psoralen is one of the oldest known chemotherapeutic drugs, and it was documented in the Ebers papyrus that I mentioned. What does Ebers refer to? Anybody remember? George Ebers, German guy that came down and bought it. And so again, that this was actually described in that very interesting papyrus. It comes from a plant found along the Nile, and it photocross-links the DNA. Now moving on to more of our volatile compounds. These are smaller often in nature, but often have very interesting aromatic qualities. So you have your terpenes, terpenoids that usually have additional elements like oxygen. You have monoterpenes, sesquiterpenes. And these are responsible, again, for the fragrance of plants. So limonene, for example, comes in many different species in the Rutaceae family. What is the Rutaceae family again? Citrus family. So that nice lemony smell you get when you grate a lemon rind, that's because of the high levels of limonene. It's predominantly limonene that causes that smell. What about camphor? Anyone ever use Vicks Vapor Rub? Kind of like camphor and menthol, and some of those compounds are found there. Some of examples of sesquiterpenes, artemisinin is found in Artemisia species. This is actually a group of compounds that's now being used in anti-malarial therapies across the globe. We're now, however, facing widespread drug resistance to some of these, so they're generating newer and newer derivatives of the artemisinin, trying to kind of keep up with the race against drug resistance.
What plant did you say that's found in?
Artemisia.
Like sagebrush?
Artemisia is, what's the common name of it?
Sweet wormwood.
Yeah, like what did you say? Wormwood.
Sweet wormwood.
Sweet wormwood.
Artemisia annual.
Yeah. Now, moving on to another class, we have alkaloids. So alkaloids are compounds that are characterized by the presence of a cyclic nitrogen. So it has to be in a cyclic formation. And you can see here in the example of caffeine and morphine. So this is what caffeine looks like. Here's what morphine looks like. These are best known, again, for their psychoactive properties. So some examples of other alkaloids include your opiate analgesics, again, coming from poppy or Papaver somniferum in the Papaveraceae family. That would include morphine. It includes your stimulant psychoactives like caffeine, any of your xanthine alkaloids, theophylline, theobromine. These are found in other plants like coffee, tea, chocolate as well. Your MAOIs, or monoamine oxidase inhibitors, we spoke about monoamine oxidase inhibitors in a specific plant last class. Anybody remember? Called the vine of the soul, Banisteriopsis caapi. That's the main ingredient in ayahuasca. And again, these are these harmala alkaloids, so kind of a group of alkaloids, allow for those hallucinations by making dimethyltryptamine orally active. There are also some interesting microbiocidal effects also against gut parasites, including Giardia and Entamoeba. Alkaloids, by the way, tend to be very bitter. So when you watch the senses video, one of the kind of warning signs of things that are intensely bitter, those are things that are also looked at when you're sensing plants. Intense bitterness, though, is not always an alkaloid. It could also be things that are very rich in certain polyphenolics or flavonoids, because, again, flavonoids can be intensely sweet or intensely bitter. Now, there are different classes of alkaloids I want to go over because they have very specific medicinal properties. So your pyridine alkaloids would include something like nicotine, and this, of course, is the stimulant drug found in tobacco, or Nicotiana tabacum. Your piperidine alkaloid class, an example of that one would include conine from Conium maculatum. This is poison hemlock. I actually have some of the herbarium I need to remember to bring to class next week that I collected. So Conium maculatum. Erecoline, this is the kind of addictive property found in betel nuts that are chewed as a stimulant recreational plant. Your pyrrolizidine alkaloids, these tend to be incredibly hepatotoxic, meaning they just destroy your liver. So I always am worried about when I find reports of the use of medicinal plants that are rich in this particular alkaloid class because they can cause a lot of liver damage. So an example would be cynoscionine, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right or not, from Coumarins from groundsel. Now, these are two plants we'll talk about next class because they're often involved in cases of mistaken identity, sometimes that are incorporated into herbal teas or herbal supplements that can cause pretty severe liver damage. Your phenylalkylamine alkaloids, this would include ephedrine from the Chinese medicinal plant ma huang, also known in scientific terms as ephedra sinica. This is a central nervous system stimulant. It also is a vasoconstrictor and bronchodilatory. So this, again, is the plant that, even in ancient traditional Chinese medicine, was being used to treat sinus inflammation or sinus congestion because it can constrict be vasoconstrictive in your sinuses. It helps reduce the amount of drainage of mucus, but also enhance dilate the bronchial pathways. Mescaline is another good example of a phenylalanine alkaloid. This is from Lophophora williamsii, or peyote. Anyone ever heard of peyote? I got to hold a peyote plant. I have a picture with it. It's really an interesting little plant. And this contributes to the hallucinogenic effects of peyote. Your quinolone alkaloids, this can include quinine from cinchona. What was quinine used again for? It was kind of the first big antimalarial drug. We still don't know how it works, by the way. I think that's fascinating. That even though it went through the world, really was used all over the place, we've never really worked out the exact mechanism of action. Other alkaloids of interest are the isoquinolone alkaloids. That would include morphine for pain medication, again from the opium poppy. Others are indole alkaloids. So reserpine, coming from snakeroot or Rauwolfia serpentina, helps to reduce high blood pressure. It's also very calming and almost like a sedative, hypnotic agent. Anyone know the famous person in history that used to use this a lot? I'll give you a clue. He's famous. He's Indian, from the continent of India. Gandhi. Gandhi used a lot of snakeroot of Rauwolfia in his kind of daily life. Ibogaine is another one of interest. This is from iboga, which is an African hallucinogenic plant. Also, it can help to reduce convulsions. Other alkaloids of interest, you have the tropine alkaloids, so hyoscine and atropine, again from the deadly nightshade or Atropa belladonna. We talked about the use of atropine in eye drops for eye exams. They use different drugs now, but in the past you could have drops of atropine add to your eyes, and it makes your pupils dilate. For an eye exam, that's also what gives it the idea of being belladonna, or beautiful woman of the dilated eyes. Your xanthine alkaloids, I mentioned this already, but this includes caffeine. These tend to be stimulants of the central nervous system and diuretics. This is why you have to pee all the time when you drink a bunch of coffee, right, or tea. It's because it has diuretic properties. It stimulates passage of urine. Your imidazole alkaloids, a good example would be pilocarpine from Pilocarpus jabarandi. These are used to treat glaucoma. These were also used in kind of witch trials where they're highly toxic plant that you would be forced to eat, and if you died, you were guilty. Okay. Other classes of plant compounds. You have lectins and polypeptides. So these are peptides, right? And what's interesting about these is depending on their charge, if they're positively charged, they can help to create kind of channels through the microbial membrane, or holes through the membrane, and that's what makes them somewhat antibacterial. A good example of this would be the favatins. These are found in fava beans, and those are also have some antimicrobial activity against gram-positive and gram-negative organisms. Other aromatic compounds, I think these might have gotten sorted out of order, but these are the phenylpropines. Phenylpropines, examples would include the smell you get when you smell the spices like clove and cinnamon. That's from compounds such as eugenol. Myristicin, again, is that major compound of nutmeg. It's been attributed with its hallucinogenic activity, but again, the line with hallucinations and nutmeg and consumption of nutmeg and myristicin really is because you're nearing death. Okay, we talked about that with the example of people that hallucinate with strychnose species or strychnine. Same kind of concept. It's approaching death, and that's what makes you hallucinate. And that was really came into play in American prison systems, was the discovery of its hallucinogenic activity, because they were using it. Saffrol is the smell you get from star anise. And these tend to be highly aromatic. These are some of the compounds you would find in essential oils of plants. And they're also broadly antimicrobial in many cases. Now, getting back to this idea of glycosides. Glycoside is basically a term for a natural product that's bound to a sugar. So you have the aglycone unit, or the non-sugar unit, plus the sugar unit. So you can have many different types of glycosides. Here's an example of a cyanide glycoside. So you've got a core aglycone unit that contains cyanide bound to a sugar. So amygdalin is a compound, it's a cyanide glycoside found in prunus species. You also have, and that's in the Rosaceae family, and you can also have cyanide glycosides found in tubers of cassava or Manihot esculenta. Anybody know, did we talk about cassava yet? So cassava is one of the major staple crops across the tropics, from South America, across Africa. However, it's a very toxic plant. Okay, so it has to be thoroughly processed. You have to grate it to release some of these compounds into the air. It has to be boiled and cooked to remove that kind of toxicity. The reason there's also sweet and what they call bitter cassava or sweet cassava. The sweet cassava, by the way, does not taste sweet. It's called sweet cassava because it lacks those heavy levels of the cyanide glycosides that give it an intensely bitter taste. So why would they want to cultivate bitter cassava that takes a lot of work to actually process out the poison before you can eat it? Yeah.
I know that, like, this is way back. I know that indigenous people in certain countries used to use cassava to make beer.
Make what?
Beers or like drinks that.
Yeah. You have fermented cassava. I think I showed a picture of me drinking it. It's a spit beer.
Yeah.
You have the oldest women in the village that have no teeth. They take the boiled tuber, they chew it, and they spit it into a tub with some sugarcane juice and let it ferment very lightly for just a few days, and then they drink it. Yeah, I've drunk that. It's interesting. But, okay, why the bitter cassava? Why not just go with the sweet cassava that takes less work to process and is less bitter?
Maybe so it wouldn't get eaten by as many animals.
Yeah, because, again, why is the plant even making that? As a defense. So if you have a crop that's able to defend itself against not only other animals, but also pathogens that can attack plants and basically wipe out your crop, this is a way of securing your food to make sure that you actually have a crop to eat during the year. So it's this balance between, again, processing out some of the poisons, but wanting some of these plants to have some of the poisons so that they can actually survive and you have a full harvest. Think about our crops today. I hype on this a lot in my food class, but I'm going to say it now because it blends with this class. How are our crops grown today? Let's talk about corn. Monocropped. So you have one big plot of the same exact variety of the same species.
Genetic clone.
Hmm?
It's a genetic clone.
The genetic clone. Yes, this is a genetic clone.
Tons of chemicals to protect them.
Tons of chemicals to protect them. What are the people in the Amazon putting on top of their cassava? Nothing. Because the plant makes its own defense chemicals. Okay? That humans have worked out how to remove those poisonous elements out of it. Do we know how to remove any of these toxic pesticides from our fruits and vegetables we buy at the grocery store? No, many of them can't be removed, right? So this is the difference, right, between taking crops in this sense out of the monoculture perspective. Okay. Other examples of glycosides, again, this is just showing binding that aglycone to the glycoside or glycone unit, sugar to the core unit. And what's interesting about glycosides is that many of them will remain inactive until they're hydrolyzed. And again, they're hydrolyzed oftentimes in the body when either by enzymes in your saliva or enzymes in the gut, and even enzymes produced by bacteria in the gut. Here's some examples of glycosides that affect us in our daily life. We talked about the brassicaceae the other day and that distinctive taste of mustards and horseradish and cabbages. That's because of the glucosinolate levels. And this is why we don't eat a jar of mustard, right? It has some levels of glucosinolates in it. It's responsible, again, for the strong odor of them. And what's interesting is that some of these glucosinolates can actually be useful in medicine. So if you've ever heard of the muscle or mustard oils or mustard packs being used to treat muscle pains or other kind of chest congestions, they're also used in the past. Now, cardiac glycosides are those compounds that are found, for example, in digitalis. These are used to treat congestive heart failure. So these are patients that their hearts don't beat strong enough. They don't have a strong enough beat. And what happens is you get fluid buildup throughout the body. So they become very kind of bloated and have a lot of edema because their heart's not working well enough. So what's interesting about compounds from like digitalis or digoxin and digitoxin is that they increase the contractility of the heart muscle and make the heart beat stronger. Now there's somebody else at Emory that works specifically on cardiac glycosides. Anyone know who it is? He works on animals, very beautiful animals. Butterflies. Anybody heard of Dr. Darude's work on the monarch butterflies? Well, okay, he's going to be coming to give us a guest lecture later in the semester, and he's going to talk about his research in cardiac glycosides. So I don't want to spoil his lecture, so I'll just say that butterflies select certain plants that are rich in these for an advantage. He's going to talk about that. So it's all about how animals also use plants in a medicinal fashion. Now, other examples of glycosides that you are probably familiar with would include those that are responsible for laxatives. So if you've ever gone to the store and been very constipated and gone in to look for some laxatives, you might want to look for some of these names. Oftentimes we're actually using natural products in many of the laxative formulations. And these work, by increasing peristaltic action. Now, the anthocyanin glycoside laxatives, I'm going to give a whole lecture that talks a lot about laxatives. Sorry, be prepared. But I'll give you this one note, especially the synicides. If you heard of synicides, these can actually cause blackening of the colon and lead to colon cancer if you use them chronically. So these are medicines that are sold over the counter, but again, the difference between medicine and poison can often be dose, right? So you don't ever want to use these on a long-term basis. And that's something I think that's not clearly explained in many cases to the population. And Cassia was another ancient Egyptian plant that was on the list from the first lecture. So in summary, we covered a lot of different classes of compounds, but the main points are that these plant secondary metabolites are made for a specific reason by the plant. They're often structurally complex. Many of them are biologically active because they're being produced by the plant to fulfill a role in a biological system, right? This is why I like to hunt for new drugs and secondary metabolites, because they're being built already to hit on specific biological targets. You have certain classes of compounds that are associated with certain effects and actions. So if I were to ask you which class of compound is most closely tied with psychoactive properties, what would you say? Alkaloids, right? Those are your stimulants. They're your hallucinogens. They're, all of those different activities. Also, these classes often have specific structural characteristics, and many of our current drugs are derived from these plant metabolites. And why I say derived is, in many cases, we've started off with the core structure of the natural drug and then modified it in medicinal chemistry labs to increase or improve upon its bioavailability or reduce its toxicity and so on.